Go, it's showtime, everybody. Hey, bring it in. We are thrilled to be joined today by Seerat Sohi of Yahoo. How are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
Good. There's David Thorpe, of course. Seerat, you grew up in Canada and moved to LA just a few weeks ago, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. 2 months ago. 2 months ago, exactly, I think, actually.
So have you been outside in Los Angeles yet, or just inside?
I got down at a point where just enough to be scared enough to be retracing my steps. I went to just enough Lakers and Clippers games and in public places. So I just had enough time to basically pack and get like the bare minimum furniture to be able to deal with all this stuff. But it's been interesting. It's been interesting for sure. Luckily, it's LA. You can go outside all the time. It would have been actually harder if I was in Toronto, all cooped up, and I'm pretty sure it's still snowing in a lot of places in Canada. So it's not so bad.
Okay. I mean, LA is not a bad place to live, I guess, in general. Mm-hmm. Judy, can you show, for some reason, it really cracked me up, Seerat's tweet about alcohol. This is on a day when
the single sweet alcohol.
Yeah, wasn't there were a lot about White Claw. What's going on with White Claw? What's in the mug, Seerat?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've had some time to think very deeply about alcohol. I think, as I imagine a lot of people have.
There you go.
Oh, right, just a retweet. Yeah. I mean, it seems like cogent advice to avoid alcohol at this point, as the Surgeon General would like us to. But I thought it'd be funny to put in the TL because no one's actually going to do that right now.
It doesn't feel like it. Yeah.
Essential business. It's an essential business.
It is.
It is. Well, I don't know if you guys saw this, but when LA was thinking of going into shelter in place and a lot of essential businesses were closing down, they had to tweet, and they prefaced it with answering this question because it's been asked a lot. Cannabis dispensaries will stay open. They are deemed an essential business. Like, to me, that was the funniest tweet. It was very California.
I think I'm right in saying that there's like some famous Churchill World War II line where basically like it was like, over my dead body will we close the liquor stores. I forget what it is, but like I feel like this is one of these things that's been studied in government for a while. It's like, oh yeah, in crisis you keep those stores.
If you want looting, close the liquor stores.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, so is there's actually precedent for why you should not do this in a crisis situation?
I mean, I'm a total expert on this, so yeah. But I think that's right. I think there's a World War II story that people study in like government class and stuff. I don't know why I have this little shred of knowledge, nor I would lead a show with it. But here we go. This is what we're doing. It's a pandemic.
It's Friday.
It's interesting. It's interesting. Yeah.
So we should talk about the. So you have written eloquently on a number of topics we'd like to discuss with you. One of them is the forthcoming Michael Jordan documentary. Can you give us your take?
Yeah, I'm really excited. The thing that I wrote about was just the fact that it came out at the same, like the anticipation of it coincided with our friend Ethan Sherwood-Strauss's book, The Victory Machine, coming out. So my experience in the past week has basically just been thinking about these two teams that were going for a three-peat, and really we're not as thrilled about the situation that they're in, despite the fact that both were on top of the basketball world. And the difference was obviously the Jordan Bulls won, but they were also honored. And I think Jordan is still, inspiring to a lot of people in a way that Kevin Durant has not really been able to get. And I don't know, I kept just thinking about why. And there's a lot of different factors generationally. Social media is definitely one of them. But I think the biggest thing was just now you can't, or you won't, I don't know what it is. I think it's a combination of both, but players aren't pretending to be happy or to be fulfilled when they're not. And we see their lives on social media. We see what they're tweeting about, what they're talking about, whether they're tweeting from their own accounts or perhaps pretending to be somebody else. And it just...
What are you talking about there?
And I mean, I try to avoid Durant specifically in that piece, just because I think he's representative of a larger issue going on in the NBA. And I think in sports and in our culture generally, where we're questioning all of these goalposts that we should be going towards in order to achieve success, I think enough people are open about mental health, enough successful people are open about how they actually feel, that I think a lot of people are thinking about what they want to achieve and what they should aspire to. And they're realizing, oh, wait, maybe like taking over the world and being on top of it isn't actually the thing. And that's really what sports is all about, right? Like, I think sports sells consumerism, and it sells aspiration back to people in a much more friendly way than I think you know, the general mechanisms of capitalism do. So, well, with the NBA, I don't know if it'll happen in other sports, but the NBA, there's been a disconnect, and it's something I've been thinking about really all season, because I think anybody who covers the league has kind of realized there was just this feeling, and you know, Adam Silver talked about these players being unhappy, but just through the entire season, there's just this feeling of like no one's really happy, no one's really enjoying this anymore. It's not like this fun ride that you kind of expect it to be. And I was just trying to figure out what had changed.
There's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
David, I know you're dying to. I know you're just burst. I can feel it through the Zoom. Like David's got thoughts.
You're right. You know me. So this is amazing stuff. Tom Friedman wrote about this in I think his book From Beirut to Jerusalem, where the first Assad president basically just wiped out an entire area, Hama, because that's where the Muslim Brotherhood was based, and he just killed everyone, bulldozed the buildings, then invited the media via buses to witness what he did.
Can we talk for 1 second? If you guys, anyone in the chat, if you had Assad as the next thing about to come up after what Seerat said,
you're gonna
$10.
You're gonna get where I'm going.
Everybody.
So when Friedman went around Syria and interviewed people, a lot of them just said, "Hey, sometimes you have to do this to get everyone in line." Our president's doing this right now, as we know. Never admit anything, any kind of infallibility. Everything is fine. We're all going to be fine. There's going away tomorrow. Jordan very much was that person. We know he had a tortured life. He's admitted it in his Hall of Fame speech. As a player, he definitely mentioned referees, but he didn't complain very much. He was always bringing that fight. He was never showing vulnerability, which to me is what we should be doing as men, because it just makes us more real and we can reach people better. But that's not what he was doing. And I think the Warriors, we saw those fissures, right? The truth is, if Durant doesn't get hurt and Klay Thompson and Kevon Looney, they're world champs. And it glosses over everything else, in my opinion anyway, pretty easily in my opinion. But things happen, which they do, and they were not strong enough to get through it for different reasons. But that vulnerability, it makes it hard for everyone just to get in line. Durant whines. I don't care that he does it all. He complains about stuff, whatever. He's a flawed human like we all are. But a lot of fans don't get in line with that the way they did with Jordan. I was coaching high school basketball when Jordan played. Inner city kids. He was God. He just was, in a way that other guys, I had Magic and Bird playing when I was coaching. They didn't have the same kind of impact.
What you said about vulnerability is really interesting, because I think one of the key issues in the way that we perceive Durant is that we still, despite the way that we talk about this stuff, only like a certain amount or a type of vulnerability.
Right.
You know, when Kevin Love comes out and, you know, writes this amazing piece in the Players Tribune and really like makes this his issue, I think, and first of all, I think that's great, but I think people like it because it's like it's not like, you know, mental health is ongoing for anybody, but it's almost like this after the fact reflection on it, which makes anybody sound a little bit wiser and like you don't want to listen to what they're saying. Whereas with KD and a lot of these other guys, we're seeing this stuff play out in real time, and as anybody who has lived knows, it's fairly ugly when it's actually happening. And it's with KD, I think one of the issues is it's the opposite of the Jordan thing. It's the opposite of, I'm going to say the same thing over and over and over again. I don't think we have a lot of room for nuance in marketing, especially of athletes. And Katie is like, I mean, I reference Ethan again, the open book that nobody could read. Says different things. He openly contradicts himself, as we all do, and he's probably more like the way that we are than certainly a guy like Jordan is. But the truth is, we don't really like ourselves very much for the most part, so we pretend we're a lot more like Jordan. We consider like for the fact that NBA fans, and I get that it's part of his hype, but the fact that people think Steph Curry is relatable is just like, that just shows you how egotistical we are. I'm like, no, Steph Curry is not relatable. He's like one of the most
Best ever of all
polished
time.
and like well-adjusted superstars who like came into fame and totally handled it well. We would be doing what the other guys are doing.
That's a great point.
That's amazing.
True.
I love that Ethan line you quoted is awesome, right? The open book no one can read. How about that? Ethan's good at this game. I think there's like, okay, this is what David and I were talking about before this started. Like, I'm concerned that Michael, like anyone who wants to be a hero would benefit from being edited, right? Like manicured, etc. It's very hard for anyone to look like a real hero in 2020 because everything is investigatable. Everything can be made public, all of your foibles. You know, like it used to be like a big Hollywood, if you were gay and you were a Hollywood star, you would just be straight in public, right? And everyone would just go for that, right? Or Babe Ruth was this terrible guy and everyone's like, no, he's the, greatest guy ever. Jordan was maybe the last real beneficiary of that, right? Like if LeBron had been 20 years earlier, maybe we would see him as this flawless character like Jordan was, right? But he didn't benefit from the editing. So now Jordan's like, I mean, I think often about that Wright Thompson story about like Jordan in retirement, who, drinks a lot of wine and plays a ton of Candy Crush, a ton, and watches LeBron highlights and just complains about how he can't go left. Like, this is not an interesting man, right?
Yeah, he's somehow a combination of like most people's moms and dads in that sense.
This is a 10 episode show about your mom and your dad. Like it might not be interesting enough. It's possible he's not that fascinating, right? Without the main
off the court, right? That's the whole point. Is on the court, he is right. Off the court is when I think Henry's point said when he said to me earlier is so dead on. It may be exactly that. That at the end of the day, he was just an amazing basketball player, and that's about it. Complaining about LeBron not going left is crazy talk, by the way. I didn't know that. LeBron has an unbelievable left hand, amazing left hand finisher.
Actually, no, not to get way late on this thing, but if you read that story, is like one of the best pieces of basketball journalism ever. You should definitely read it. Right. But my point more is like, he's been someone who has been on camera for 30 seconds going into the event, or in a commercial, or in a studio, or in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, or that's not, you know what I mean?
Space Jam.
But very manicured performances. Like, I don't know that it's a different set of people who are famous when the camera's on all day. Right. Different set of skills that works. I've seen no evidence. I think that when the camera's on all day on Jordan, it's pretty weird and not that likable. And people who knew him well, like Scottie Pippen, aren't going around saying what a great guy he was, right? I'm worried that the heroic quality of him relies entirely on not seeing too much.
I think that would go for almost anybody, right? Yes. Like, take it back to Steph. I think the reason he's managed to avoid all this stuff is that even if you have the camera all over him all the time, he seems like he's at least like some facsimile of what you're sold. And you also have the Warriors kind of machinery as well playing into it in the way that, like, he's almost the only guy that could actually get away with being highly covered and still eminently likable at the same time, whereas with all of these other guys, I don't know, I don't see that happening as it would for, by the way, like anybody, like I don't think it would reflect very well on most people if you follow them around with the camera and try to figure out how it is that they excel at work.
For sure, right? So but so like the Tiger King though has a kind of character that works with cameras rolling for hundreds of hours, right?
Sure, but that's like
ongoing.
Just like I think that. Sorry to cut you off there.
No,
but like I think with entertainment, it's generally like sports is very different in that you have to consistently present this image of, first of all, like continued aspiration even after you've gotten to the top of the mountain, which I think is like an issue for both of these teams that we're talking about. But also, like, you have to continually create that over and over again. Something like Tiger King or a lot of other things that we watch that aren't in sports, like, they can be purely entertaining and also paint, like, a pretty demoralizing picture about humanity that can be, honest and really fascinating. But you're not going to tune in weekly and be like, I love these guys. you know?
Right. I think that's what I'm saying. Like if you're making a documentary series, like Tiger King has like 3 or 4 murder plots, like, who done it kind of stuff interwoven. Hell yeah, that's going to work every time for a 6-hour series, right? I don't think Michael Jordan has that kind of narrative. I don't know. I haven't seen it yet, but like he's there not because of the narrative that he presents, but because of the name. And like a lot of air could come out of that balloon if it's just boring, right? Like, and he's, I'm sorry not to go on to it, like he was more famous than Jesus. Than some, like, there was some pretty good research, I don't know, 10 years ago about who the most famous people, like first on Google Trends or something. Michael Jordan was at that time literally more famous than Jesus on planet Earth. And that's a big place to come down from. You know what I mean? Like the Tiger King had nothing to lose in letting the cameras in, right? Not famous. But Jordan he is still selling shoes, right? Like, if we learn a lot about him and he's not fascinating and likable and lovable, like, it's a risk.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's definitely true. And I think you guys are probably right. We probably know almost everything there is to know about him. That's also, I think, why there's so much anticipation for the documentary, because I think one of the big questions going in was, what else do we really need to know? But what do you think about just following the entire season? We know, that season was full of dysfunction on all levels, really. And, I think one of the more interesting things, if they get into it, will be the perception of Phil Jackson after the fact. First, just from the perspective of like, how do you keep a team together when it's, you're going for 6 and they're adults now, and there's all these professional jealousies and all these squabbles over money, that, I think some people will be learning about for the first time, like the way that Scottie Pippen was treated, for example. I think would not play today. First of all, if Scottie was playing today, I think he might actually have like one of the most different arcs, at least during his career, because we'd have like all the analytics to appreciate him, but also he'd have more of a pulpit to say like, dude, I'm getting screwed here, but
totally.
What about all that stuff? Like, do you think that for a new audience, and also just to like see it on a different medium, that won't be enough for it to be interesting?
We'll have to see, but like, I could be totally eating my words. We'll be back here. We'll have you back and we'll see if I'm full of crap, right? I probably will be full of crap. It happens all the time. But I guess I'm a big believer in like, these little tricks they use to make us love TV, of like cliffhangers and history or whatever. And like, I don't like, they can't shoot new footage for this thing, right? So do they have that in the can? What are the plot points going to be where it's going to be like, ooh, is he going to deck Steve Kerr or whatever? It's like, yeah, he is.
I want to see if they're going to be honest about like some of the near misses that weren't because anything he did or the Bulls. What was it Game 7 where the Knicks one year missed 15 free throws and lost by 3? That wasn't Jordan playing defense. Now, a little bit was Jordan's mystique, just like Tiger has won some majors because his number one, in fact, there was a study a couple years ago where whoever played with Tiger in the last round, on average, just shot horribly.
Oh, really?
Tiger had nothing to do with that on the course. It was Tiger, the persona. Wow. That definitely affected, at least to some degree, some Knicks players or whatever. But that wasn't Jordan being the world's greatest player. It was those guys just missing free throws, right? I'd love to hear that side. He did get a little bit lucky. It's okay. Luck is part of it. The Cavaliers don't have to apologize for their world championship. Neither do the Raptors. Neither do the Warriors in year 1 of LeBron in Cleveland when they were down Love and Irving and lost in 6 games with David Black. This is what happens. It's okay to admit it. But the narrative with Jordan always is unbeatable. Like all these guys, these blowhard journalists, you can never beat Jordan. He was an assassin. Well, they missed 15 free throws or Jordan would have lost before he even got to the finals that one year. And there's more stories than that.
So if the key plot points are missed free throws, then I rest my case that there's not a lot of exciting plot here.
Yeah, but the three of us will enjoy it a lot, though.
Yeah, totally. I'm into it. That'll be great.
He won 1 college championship. Joakim Noah won 2. So
right. Florida.
Well, yeah. Christian Laettner went to 4 Final Fours. Jordan went to 1 and 3. Same as Grant Hill, actually. I think he went to 4 also.
Yeah, Rod's got the Gator comment. All right, sir. Moving on. You wrote a really beautiful story about a Girls on the Run group meeting Rudy Gobert. Can you tell us that story, please?
Yeah. So there was a group of girls on Monday before the season got canceled. I believe it was March 9th. They got a chance to meet Rudy Gobert. They went to a Jazz game. It was against the Raptors. And after the game, they met him. They took pictures and all that stuff. And then, lo and behold, 2 days later, the entire season is canceled. And these girls and their parents, they're scrambling, and they can't figure out what to do. And the way that I found out about this story was I was actually just going to write a column off of Kevin Durant getting the coronavirus. And at the time, a lot of people were talking about like why these athletes should or shouldn't get tested. And I had some questions about just the veracity of that, and whether I was actually going to go the opposite direction at first. I was thinking, okay, you know what, if there are a limited amount of tests and testing doesn't change the way that you'd be treated, if it's serious, you'd still be treated the same way as if you had pneumonia or like a flu. And that was kind of what we were thinking at the time. Obviously, all this stuff, just changes a ton. But I talked to an epidemiologist who essentially said, well, basically, if these guys are going to be the ones that get tested, at least they meet 20,000 people, not meet, but they're in the same room, and like you have the ability to scare 20,000 people at once, really. And it was at a time where people still weren't really taking this seriously, that it might actually be good, and they can also be role models for the cause. But just they create a bigger transmission chain of fear, basically. So from there, I just started thinking about the fact that there had been another girl in Boston who had been tested positive after meeting a Jazz player, and I found out that there was one in Utah that hadn't really been reported on. So I reached out to her, and from there it just turned into a much bigger story, just about like the splinter effect of when your community may or may not be affected by the coronavirus. And if you're in a lower income community, just like the little things that make everything a lot more difficult. For me personally, like the reason it turned into something bigger was she was telling me about her daughter, and how her daughter was so worried about what people were going to say, and like she didn't know how to talk to her about the fact that, like, it in the end, her daughter was feeling sick. She wasn't able to get a test at first, and then in the end, like, she used the city councilman that she had known to help her basically figure out a way to get tested. And her daughter did test negative, but there were other girls in the community who had met him, and never were able to get tested, and should have been. But there's just so much fear and shame and uncertainty around the idea of having the coronavirus. And it was a Native American community that was very tight knit, and everybody knew each other, and people had known that they went to the game, they could have been infected. And like, the students at schools, you don't think about the fact that, like, we've all been in elementary school. Elementary school kids are not very nice. You're talking about like, oh, like, did these, like, are these girls a reason the school closed down? Like, are they going to infect everybody? And they're also worried about infecting their grandparents, who a lot of them, live in households where, your grandparents are living with you, which is another logistical thing that makes self-isolation or quarantining way harder than for a lot of us who aren't in that situation. So there are just a lot of layers there that I realized were important to unpack. And that's how we got to that story.
It is kind of an argument for, like, well, I mean, thank goodness Rudy got tested, I guess, right? He could have done this every night for a lot longer if he hadn't been tested.
Has someone written about that?
Yeah.
Has someone written about what if that Oklahoma City guy doesn't come out there and say, stop this game, get these guys off the court? Like we heard, Seerat, I don't know if you heard Dwayne Casey. We talked to him a couple weeks ago, but he was coaching. And I just forgot. I think it was their Dolan Bay, maybe. who was the one that they said get him off the court right away? They traded him.
Mm-hmm.
He was hanging out with Rudy the night before. Dwayne told us that story on this show. But if that guy doesn't come out and stop the game, Henry, I mean, they were going to play the Zion Williamson Lakers game that night.
Yeah,
2 hours later.
I'm still a little fuzzy on exactly what happened there, right? Like the Jazz and the league were discussing the positive test, but did not stop the game, right?
No.
Like a Thunder guy,
Right.
Johnny Strack runs across the court. I'm like, can we just recap again? Like who knew what, when, and how many people knew about this and didn't stop the game?
Right.
What the hell? Sorry, that's a side point.
Yeah.
We haven't lost the plot of Seerat's amazing story here, but yeah.
Well, it is one of the things that I think we should go back and look at is how many people knew he was getting tested.
Yeah.
And that he was sick. Because
I think he was symptomatic when he met your girls, right?
I think so. I think he he was questionable with the flu and he ended up playing.
We're all Donovan Mitchell in this one. A little pissed off.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also the thing that struck me was that Rudy was in a kind of similar situation to them as well. Like in the night that it happened, because he was touching the microphones and that photo went viral. He's basically getting like social media bullied, and I don't think, especially for kids, we've really tried to. I talked to a couple of epidemiologists and mental health specialists when I was writing that story, and there's really no framework on how to talk to kids about this. And you see the way that it impacts even like a fully grown man, and obviously social media and being like the center of a storm are very different. But we need a framework, I think, to help people who've been diagnosed with it, especially young kids, to discuss with them like, hey, like listen, like this thing isn't this thing happened to you. It isn't you. It's nothing to be ashamed of. When in reality, like what happens when you get it is that you do become you have to be quarantined. You have to be away from everybody. And if you're young, like something like that, like going through something like that, you're just not going to be able to, I think, process that in a healthy way.
It's funny. Point. It was at the time that you were writing about, it did feel very much like you were almost radioactive or glowing or just socially I feel like we have moved on somewhat, right? That now we all know more stories and we're accustomed to the arc of this. It's a more common thing. But at that time, it was like literally run screaming from the building if you encounter somebody who's been exposed to the virus, right? It was socially just outrageous at that time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're outside and get rained on, you got rained on. You didn't do anything wrong. You were outside, like a lot of us are. It's just rain.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Like anything else.
Yeah.
It's a good point though on just the stigma in general. But I also think when you talk about Seerat, when you talk about how do we deal with this kind of stuff, this is going back to why Henry calls it true hoop. The famous movie Bull Durham, which is probably the best, I think it's the best sports movie, when Kevin Costner is teaching Tim Robbins, who's the star young pitcher, all the cliches. Like, we're done with that. We're done with that. If you played badly, talk about it. I work with pro athletes, as you all know, and I just rather them be truthful. It doesn't have to tell them everything. You're allowed to have privacy, but you're also going to be better off just being honest with people. And it's not about managing your brand. It's about mental health. If you just show who you are and share your feelings, that's that. I don't agree with Randy on that.
I do.
Listen, I don't like Kevin Costner for a very different reason.
Do tell. What's wrong with Kevin Costner?
Well, there was a period of time where my wife from Sherwood preferred him over me.
Oh.
And I actually went to a party one year at a Final Four in '94. And my brother and I were there, and Costner was at this very kind of posh party. And they had their own table, we had our table, and my brother Mike were like, fuck Kevin Costner. By the end of this night, all these rich people in the room are going to be at our table. And God damn it, we were right.
What's your stance on Costner?
Have you seen Bull Durham?
I haven't.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
Randy, you too.
Throw it on the list.
I love this show so much. Like, we just suddenly were like, fuck Kevin Costner. What's happening? Yeah, I honestly, my friends are like make fun of me because like I just can't stand Kevin Costner. I think he's a terrible actor. That stupid Robin Hood movie where he didn't even act. Like he's literally Kevin Costner standing around a movie set pretending like occasionally drifting into a British accent. Anyway, we digress.
That was Morgan Freeman's first Hollywood role, by the way, at 45.
What?
I believe. Look it up. I've heard him talk about it. That he was like he just kept trying until he was 45. It's a great success story. Yeah.
Randy's in the chat saying he tries to ruin every movie he's in and succeeds many times.
God and Bull Durham now.
Okay, let's try to be serious adults on a different topic. What about oh, here's a good calming, focusing topic: mental health in a pandemic.
Yeah.
I really love this story. So you talked to Dr. William Parham, who's the Players Association Director of Mental Health and Wellness, and he talked to you about players and how they're going to cope with this kind of stuff. Amazing stuff. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah. So I think players are in a unique situation on both ends of the spectrum, in that some of them, because they're such creatures of habit, would be able to adjust to this pretty reasonably well, but then others, because of any number of reasons, and I think we're all kind of going through that. Life pauses, and you start thinking about stuff that there's a reason we move so quickly all the time. You don't really want to be thinking about every single thing you've been through. And for players, they are in a unique situation where their livelihood, even practicing their livelihood for a lot of them, they're not like shooting a basketball for an extended period from probably the first time in their life. And that's really how they get away from a lot of stuff, and what's driven them to get to this place is taken away from them at the same time as they have a lot of time to reflect on a lot of different things in their life. And I thought that just had to be fraught, and so I decided to reach out to the Players Association just to see how they were trying to manage that situation.
There's this quote about basically when they're playing, now I'm quoting Dr. Parham, there are any number of ways to feel appreciated, valued, wanted, to feel like you make a difference, to feel like you're satisfying your purpose. Hidden in pandemics and crises, we are needing to manage exactly those opportunities to feel valued, to feel engaged, wanted, special, and helpful. I think we all relate to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're all kind of in this position where we're taking stock of all these little things in our lives that used to give us a lot of joy and make us feel valued. And I think it's a good opportunity to realize, like, just internally where you get your gratification from, and hopefully, if you can, in this way, in the way that we're living right now, if you can recreate that in some way, that's obviously just good in the short term for you, and also like it might give you just some like long-term tricks on how to live and how to be happier. That was the upshot of it. That's kind of how he looked at it, and he was very positive about all things. I think the way that he looks at mental health, and the way that I think increasingly we should all look at mental health, is that it's an optimizer. I think there's like this idea in sports that you just like shove away all your demons and like put everything into your craft, and then if you win, it'll cover everything up and you'll be really, really happy, and you won't have to ever deal with anything that you've ever been through. And largely it's also worked the opposite way, where the idea of sorting yourself out would lend itself to bad performance. And what he says is that it's actually the opposite. Like, basically, the more in tune you are with yourself, the better you're going to perform. And it's one of the ideas that he's really been trying to hammer, because we think of sports, which really is, going back to the MJ thing and why it makes him so relevant to this day. Like, sports is a way that we kind of relate to society generally. We don't really, I've been thinking more about sports in its absence, and it's not like we're watching like Greek tragedies or whatever people used to do back in the day to have like their heroes reflected back to them. Is like we're not doing that. We're watching sports, and if like you can get the message across that you should actually just be completely vulnerable and in touch with yourself and perform well in like this really ruthless world that's like defined by like physicality and competition, it I think would probably go a long way to encourage everybody to think about how they're feeling, I guess. You know.
Athletes are getting better at and being mentored better at doing things like yoga and meditation. Like it's 10 years ago, those words never came up unless I brought them up. Teams never talked about it. We still have a ways to go. What a player that I know sent me what his strength trainer sent to him to do every day. And it's exactly what like all these things look like. There was no mention of yoga on there. There was no mention of meditation. Maybe he did on a different email, but not to my knowledge. But we need more of those guys to embrace that part of it. It's not just about puffing up, being macho, and benching 200 pounds 20 times, whatever. That's actually counterproductive in a lot of ways, in both mentally and physically. Getting guys to be like you said, be in touch with yourself, being mindful of your role and your place. It's harder for single guys. The ones that are married and or have kids, they're starting to be more open to that than I had experience with 10 years ago. They're getting that. Hey, right now I can hang out with my kids every day. That's carrying more weight than I think summers used to do in between the seasons. There are a lot of
interesting. I mean, that's obviously a positive development. And the PA also, like in their newsletter that they send to all their players, like they do talk about that stuff. They do talk about how yoga and meditation should be in your daily routine and put into your workouts. And Dr. Parham actually, is doing an installment on coronavirus, and like every successive PA letter that goes out, I think they were looking at 10 installments at first. I don't know where it's at right now, but I think when we talked, it was at the second one. So for them, I think they realize that it's definitely like the psychological impact of this is going to matter, and they think about it very specifically, which is what I also found was interesting as well.
I thought there was this amazing, so we're all needing to attend to our mental health more than ever before, and like freaking out in our various different ways, right? As commonly known that this is happening around the globe. Meanwhile, I don't know if you guys have listened to the CJ McCollum interviewing Carmelo Anthony when they found out that the season was postponed, but it's a really interesting podcast. Here are two very high achieving, hardworking. They're like decades into building their routines, right? And how they're going to spend their day and to optimize for on-court success, right? And they get word of this. And I'm telling you, like, go and listen. And I can't remember how exactly the transition goes, but within 3 minutes, they're talking about the fact that they both meditate every day. CJ says he tries to do it 3 times a day. Carmelo does it every day. And they're already like, oh, pandemic, subroutine 4B is ready to go. We've been warming it up for a long time. Let's go. We're going to bring mental health. Like, exactly. I was like, they are so good at this, right? It's impressive.
Well, that's the benefit of being like having the mindset of like an athletic competitive person. Once you convince them that it's going to help them, like they'll embrace it completely.
No question.
There's nothing they won't do to win a game and get better and get paid more, which is okay.
Right. Yeah. There's one other thing that you wrote about, Seerat, unless there's anything else you want to add on this topic.
I think the one thing I would say is like, the start of that piece, I was talking to a guy named Dr. Morgenstein. I can't remember his full name, but the way that we started our conversation, he immediately, he asked me how I was doing, and I gave this perfunctory kind of like the answer that I give all the time, right? And I think we've all come up with our general answer to how we're dealing with the pandemic that's at this point become well practiced for most people. And I asked him how he was doing, and he was actually honest about it. He was like, oh, well, like today, we're trying to teach my daughter something, and we're realizing that, this feels like more of a homeschool situation than a virtual learning situation. And, talking about his wife's business having to shut its doors temporarily, and just like the difficulties of that. And then, then we just moved on and started talking about, why the mental health reasons that I called him. But I actually didn't even realize that he was doing, I mean, I don't know if it was on purpose, but it was obviously like a very good thing to do. It's just like when somebody asks you how you're doing, to actually tell them. I didn't realize that that had happened, not until I actually transcribed the conversation. That's how autopilot I was
Yeah.
in the moment.
Great stuff.
And I guess the lesson of that is just like for anybody is just like, the thing I learned from there was like, well, all we can really do is try to be a little more present in all these situations, and to be honest, like the little things that you can do in a day are, I think, are huge. And it comes down to just like taking the extra 2 minutes and saying, oh yeah, no, this is how I'm feeling, and actually then being able to articulate it.
I guess you're kind of role modeling that it's okay to be in struggle.
Totally, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And this is like an extremely like high functioning person who is like, you know, at the same time while being a professor is like working with the government to help like come up with solutions to the coronavirus crisis, and is like working like 16-hour days and stuff. Like if anybody, you know, hypothetically should be blowing right past stuff, it's him, right? But he's not. He's doing the exact opposite.
Yeah. That is one thing I really enjoy about this time is everything's okay, right? Like if you told me that you played 20 straight hours of video games 2 months ago, I'd be like, whoa, what is wrong with you? But now I'd be like, yeah, no, we're all doing our best, right? Like similarly, I had a Zoom meeting with a very expensive British attorney recently, and from like a super fancy law firm, but the dude's in his garage, and you can see like one of the attorneys had oh my gosh, oh gosh, this is so embarrassing, but you know, little animated figurines and stuff, and you know, what are the little yellow guys called? You know, the
Minions?
Yeah, minions. They're like little stuffed minions on the desk and stuff. And I'm like,
Awesome.
I love it. I love it that like this guy's a super professional, like, you know, and at work he would never be seen like this, right? But he had messed up hair and he's wearing whatever he's wearing, and he's got minions all over the desk, and that's just how we're rolling these days. And not only do I not have a problem with that, I prefer that.
My wife told me that there's some underwear company advertising when she listens to NPR or whatever in the morning on Sirius, and they're basically saying, in your Zoom meetings, wear whatever shirt you need to wear, and then just wear these underwear, and you'll be fine the rest of the day. Very clever. Very, very clever. Yeah.
Sometimes you have to stand up, though, right?
That's true.
All right, so I've done pretty well today in not mentioning how to ask a question. The answer, of course, is to click the little chat button. If you ask a question over there, I will articulate it to Seerat, or you can put the word video, which basically no one ever does, but we encourage it, and then you can come on video and ask a question yourself. Seems like the chat mostly now is about Kevin Costner. Maybe I'm missing something, but in lieu of that, I think Gerard is here, and if we have any traditions on this show, it's that Gerard joins us by video and says something that's smarter than what David and I said in the actual earlier part of the show. There he is.
Not true at all. What's up, guys?
What's up, man?
Seerat, I really enjoyed the piece on Jordan, the last documentary, and the contrast between Ethan's book. You know, if we're looking at everything, and I'm wondering, and I'm sure because you cover the league, how much of this is sort of this binary thing that we have as fans and observers, and even as media people like myself, like where things have to be one or the other, right? And it's not no one's one or the other. Like no one's inherently good, no one is inherently evil, right? Like things just kind of happen all across this spectrum. Michael Jordan is an archetype that works for us, right? Like the supremely gifted athlete who doesn't give an F, who's just whatever, like that. You like that. Like that means he's amazing, and we ascribe, as you said, all these things to him. But Kevin is like us, and we don't like that, right? And it's like this weird, like, well, we're not sure. And I just wonder, like, because we see that in our politics too, right? Like no one can figure out, like, it's not because liberals aren't all great either, right? Like there's nuance in this, and I just feel like we somewhere, I don't know when it happened, we lost nuance somewhere in our collective consciousness. I don't know when that happened.
I'd argue maybe we never had it.
Right. Never.
Maybe you're right. Maybe we never had it.
Yeah.
I think
thinking about it at least.
Sorry, go ahead, David.
No, go ahead, Sarah. I said my piece. Go ahead.
Well, I think that largely, especially in sports, but just like with celebrity in general, and I guess with politics, we cover it like sports now. People just want a story that they can understand, for the most part. Like the story of Michael Jordan is digestible. I think that it's almost like fake nuance. Like there's a lot of fake nuance stories about athletes and celebrities in general that
Like
we read
what?
all the time.
What's an example of a fake nuance story?
Ooh, man. Almost everything we read, I think is somewhat packaged, and even when it gets into the weeds of it, there's always stuff, as we know, it's left on the cutting room floor. There's things that we see that we can't really at the time say or report, but man, I'd say a lot of stuff about LeBron is, I think, LeBron's a big fake nuance guy, big fake nuance guy. But he made a heel turn, I think, after winning a championship, or at a certain point where he started kind of reframing himself as just a kid from Akron, right? And if you look at it from the perspective, from a socioeconomic perspective, yeah, LeBron James never should have been where he was, but you can also really easily repackage that story for somebody like Steph Curry, who is the exact opposite of LeBron. But we want this, it's like the hero's journey thing, where we want something that we've seen before, but we don't think we've seen before. It's the underdog rises up, is beat by his own hubris, and then re-rises, and we see this entire process play out. And I mean, one of the big things with KD is that we probably never hated him enough to love him. We want to hate you and then love you and then love you and then hate you. And with KD, because probably because he's actually just been acted like a human being would on this stage, and that's really the only. He's honestly this. I could cut this really short and just say that KD is poorly branded. He just didn't think about I don't know what it was. I don't know who it was, but they didn't there hasn't been this effort to figure out what the KD story is in a way.
Well, they tried it. It didn't work, right? Nike tried the whole KD's not nice thing, and that didn't jive for him apparently.
Yeah, sick of being number two didn't work. But these were also I don't know. These weren't the most compelling narratives, and the not nice thing didn't work because it also just it so clearly wasn't true.
Right.
With what you saw from him on the court, it was he was instead of embracing something, he was rejecting what people were saying about him.
Right.
And actually, that might be the Kevin Durant story. But yeah, I think he wasn't, and he isn't easily packageable. I think, and anytime you read a big profile about him, I find myself trying to figure him out, and you can't, because you really can't with most people. Most people are way too complex to really be be boiled down in any sort of art medium, right? So they have to. They have to pretend to be different things. And
well, Henry, it's something that we saw with the Chad Ford when Chad was here yesterday or the day before. Chad talked about this idea of breaking down these walls, and I think that's why we can't get the authentic KD stories, because of all the walls he has up, right? The whole nomadic wanderer thing, I think, is a piece for him because of his whole childhood being disrupted constantly, right? There's something there that we can't. He won't let whomever get enough access to get there so that we can get that story for whatever reason.
I was looking over there for Marcus's book, which is here.
Yes, Marcus has got the closest.
Yeah.
To.
There it is. I had coffee with Marcus in Oakland, and I'm basically in the finals. I'm what is basically I'm asking what everyone would ask, right? What is he really like, right? And Marcus, who's a great storyteller and knows KD really well, and we should have him on the show. But he just kind of could talk in allegory, right? He's sort of somewhat more understandable, but not understandable, right? I thought they had him. I felt like I understood him in 2010 when LeBron was going to Miami and looked like a villain. And KD was like, I just love basketball. I'm playing all summer. Lockout KD, backpack pick KD. Like that felt like the last real time we knew what he was up to. He made at least that branding jived with his actual character. And since then it feels mostly like, he's surprisingly thin-skinned, which isn't really a brand.
You guys talking about KD and then Jordan, it makes me think of something else too. Jordan, without question, was helped greatly by Scottie Pippen, right? The way those guys played, Pippen's especially ability as a facilitator and even a better defender probably than Jordan, or at least close enough, which is impossible to imagine, but it was true. And he embraced it. He might have been a jerk to Scottie those first 3 championships, whatever. I think things got better after baseball. Steph Curry is as perfect a teammate. If you scripted in a lab a teammate for KD at that point in his career, you would come up with Steph, who doesn't mind sharing the spotlight or giving it away. And by the way, I can get you 40 almost any night I want to, typically efficiently, and I can pass the ball to you. And especially if you ask for it, here, take it. I'm not going to argue with you. And he left that. That's to me, I mean, Kawhi leaving Toronto was very strange to me, although he went home. And I understand that and would never knock it. KD going to Brooklyn to play with Kyrie when he was already with Steph, I thought that, I mean, I realized some things happened, but that to me was very odd.
I think about Steve Snapper Jones.
Years
ago.
Yeah.
Steve Snapper Jones said to me, he was when Stephon Marbury left Minnesota, he was like head in hand, and he was like, "How do you leave Kevin Garnett?"
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He was right. Right. Like that that was crazy.
I give Jordan credit for at least that one part for sure. Is he knew? I think he knew what he had, and when they teamed up to just destroy Kukoc, that must have meant the world to Pippen. Like it may have been the first time that Pippen felt Jordan sees me.
Yeah,
he wasn't so great at it at first. I bet Pippen must have just when the best player ever says, "Hey, we're gonna go get this guy," wow, and we're getting paid for that. That different when you're playing for the Bulls. That was empowering. I want to hear Pippen talk about that some.
We're gonna have that opportunity, I guess.
Yeah, right.
Jared, one last thing. It seems to me, just as a reader, that you're having a easier time than most coming up with interesting angles to cover in the pandemic.
Thanks.
Is that because you're
just say thank you?
Yeah.
I mean, how's that going? Do you feel like you have 50 more things you could write about if you had enough time to do the writing and the reporting?
Yeah. I don't know. It's been really interesting, this whole thing. I don't know as far as stories go, but I would say the same for you. I think that there's just a lot going on right now, and it's not necessarily what's happening on the court, but there's so many different dynamics. And also, like, luckily at Yahoo, they're kind of the mental health NBA piece was not really a piece about the NBA. They've been pretty cool about just saying, like, whatever you want to write about at this point. Like the wheels are kind of off, and it's been, I don't want to say it's been fun, but it's been like intellectually challenging, and it's been interesting. And it's just like, it's allowed me to nerd out and write about stuff that I probably would have written about if I wasn't writing about the NBA. So I just, I wanted to, I guess, take that opportunity.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. It's cool. I enjoy it.
Thanks.
Do you want to talk about White Claw?
I always want to talk about White Claw. I mean, I think White Claw is the gigantic conspiracy going on. Sorry?
What is it? What is White Claw?
White Claw is like, it's like an alcoholic seltzer.
Do you have one? Do you have one handy?
Yes. If you insist that I, for professional reasons, have to pull out a White Claw before 9 a.m. Pacific, fine. I can only give the people what they want.
That's what the people. This is what the people need.
I don't know what it is.
David, you're about to get a lesson right here.
This is White Claw. It is an alcoholic seltzer.
How alcoholic is it? What proof is it?
So so it's only 5%. And my thing has been, it's kind of taken off. It's gotten like the biggest branding dub, I think, from all of these alcoholic seltzers that have become a lot more popular, and should have honestly like been popular a long time ago. They're highly convenient. But I don't.
It was.
I'm
It
not
was
sure.
called Charles and James.
Yeah, but you know, like
Thanks
just
for
get
your
a
support.
prepackaged. Yeah, I don't know. I don't believe that there's a lot of alcohol in them. And apparently it's other people have had different experiences, and you know, I can only speak of my experience.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's popular. It's a big,
That's,
it's a big drink. People
What I
drink
like
it.
about it is
yeah,
like
it's very popular.
Seerat's got a very nuanced mind and takes very sort of measured takes on almost everything. But on a White Claw, she's like
It's a conspiracy.
in touch with her inner like cranky 65-year-old Canadian farmer who's like, needs to be stronger.
I just feel like, I mean, honestly, I have to commend it, but I think they've fallen into like an amazing situation where they make this like this beverage that, you know, despite the fact that I've hated on it, I continue to purchase, that is clearly not that alcoholic and will really only make you have more of them, which is just an
Genius.
awesome, yeah, like that's you just have to applaud that work by them, but by making an inferior product, they're getting us to use it more. But yeah, they've really over the summer, I think it was a combination of just like it taking off on Twitter. It's become like the preeminent brand for hard seltzer, which, you know,
So
good for them.
maybe
It's a good time to be that.
Maybe Seerat drinks 7 or 8 in the next few hours, and go ahead and send us some of those never-ending story ideas you got.
Yeah.
I need the court to be
Fine.
happening. I need game.
Fine.
All right. Okay, this has been very productive. Thank you very much.
This was a blast. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks. We'll do it again. Seerat, thanks for coming. Gerard, thank you as ever for being here. Everyone, David, we will see you next week, 11 o'clock. Monday,
weekend, guys.
actually, Monday, actual former CIA analyst talking about how being a CIA analyst, an intelligence analyst, is like analyzing the coronavirus. It's going to be great.
So Carrie Matheson?
Wow.
Oh, of course it is. Love that show.
Be
All
safe
right.
out
Thank
there,
you, guys.
everyone.
See you next week. Thanks.